This session is on final keyword. Let's see the usage of final keyword. So final keyword can be used with variables, it can be used with methods, and it can be used with classes. So with variables, you can define, let's say, double pi is equals 3.14. If you put a final before that variable, then it becomes a constant. That means once you have assigned only, you can assign it only once. You cannot change it after that. So if I try to change pi is equal to 3.15, you are going to get a compilation issue. Next is with the methods. So if you can try using final with a method, you cannot override it. So see that example, we have a bank class and bank class is having some rules and I defined that rules method as final. That means what we are trying to say here is this rules method is the final one and you cannot override it. What do you mean by overriding? You are trying to provide a different implementation in the child class. So here when I say the parent class method as final, then that means this particular method you cannot rewrite it. You cannot override it in the subclass. So when you try to have the BOA class which is extending the bank and you try to override this void rules method, it is going to give you a compilation issue saying that you cannot override this final method. So the last thing is you can use the final keyword with the classes. So when you say make a class public final class federal law, what is going to happen is we are saying this class is the final class and no one can inherit it. So the concept of inheritance is you can subclass this one and you can add more functionalities. Let's say we have a person class and employee class, means employee is kind of making use of the person class. It's getting all the properties of person class and behaviors of person class. Along with that, it is adding its own methods. But here what we are saying is this is the final and you cannot really override it. You cannot override any of its method. You cannot even inherit it. You cannot make one more class out of it. So because this is the final implementation of the class, I don't want anyone to extend me and give their own implementation. So take an example of federal law. So federal law, it gives some laws like law 1, law 2, like lot of laws, and a state law cannot really override the. You don't want to create a class called state law and extend the federal law and create your own laws. So if you want to do that, if you want to make that, the class can be defined as final. That means it will not allow any other class to extend it. Final variables. So as I said, final variables cannot be modified. They are constants. They can be assigned with a value when they are declared. They should be assigned in the constructor if they are not assigned before. So you can define an instance variable, but you don't need to assign it, but you have to at least assign it in the constructor. And final variables can also be static. So again, the same rule for static variables also. So you have to define it when you create it itself. If you don't want to initialize it with the value, you can still do it in the static block. And final variables can also be used as a method parameters. Let's see one example. So in this class, if you look at it, the first one, final int k and final int l, these are all instance variable and I have made it as final. So this, when you make these variables as final, you may not be able to change it again. So look at this, we made int l is equal to 10. We have initialized it as well when I create the variable itself. But for k, it is not initialized. That means unless you are initializing it, it is going to give you a compilation error. But I have initialized in the constructor. As you see here, the test k is equal to 20 is assigned here, right? So that is k is initialized in the constructor. And as you see, the final variables, the usual naming convention is to keep it as capital letters actually. So if you can keep them as capital letters, that indicates that they are constants and they are not going to change. And we have defined two static variables as well. One is initialized, s1 is equal to initialized when they are declaring it itself. The other one is not initialized, but it can be initialized in the static block. Static block is like static with the curly braces, and you can put all the static initializations over there. So this is the first thing when the class is loaded when you're running the program and when the class is getting loaded, it first looks for the static variables. It gets assigned the static variables, and then it is going to invoke the static block. So it is going to execute the static block first, and then it means the class is getting loaded. and after that only you are creating the objects of the class, and then it gets calling your constructors and all the stuff. So you can also have your final variable as parameters, which means that I cannot change v value inside the block. And finally, you can have the final variables for a local as a local variable. That means I'm putting final inside a method. G is a local variable to do something, and you can still have a final variable, and you can assign it in the same statement, or you can do it in the next statement or any other statement, but it can be assigned only once. It cannot be the next statement. You cannot say G is equal to 10. That is not going to work. Final objects, so they are kind of little bit different. I wanted to show you the previous example what we did for the address. So here we have a person object and we have a address object. The difference is I'm making the address as a final here. Final address A is equal to new address of. That means, A cannot be changed again. If you make it as A is equal to new address again, it will not be able to make it because the A is final there. Once created, it's going to be, you cannot change A to point to a different address. A is going to point only to that address. Okay, so we have created a person variable. We have the address variable as you see here, and then now A is pointing to, P is pointing to the person, and A is pointing to the address 4000 and 5000. Now we make P dot address equal to A, so which is again pointing to this. This is all fine, but what we cannot do is, A cannot be changed. You cannot change A is equal to new address or A is equal to a different value. You cannot do it because A is final. Once assigned, it cannot be changed. So that is the objects. Uh, but the contents of A can be changed. Only the A cannot point to a different address which is in 6000 or something. But A's contents can be changed. A dot address 1, A dot address city, all this information can be changed. Only the reference variable cannot be changed, so you have to be careful. If you wanted to be not changing the contents also, then the contents, the address class contents also need to be made as final. So you have to make, when you create the class address, you have to make um, final string address 1, final string address 2, like that, so that even that cannot be changed. Otherwise only the reference variable will be final and not the object itself, not the contents of the reference variable itself. So let's see this in Eclipse. I'll make it as final demo. So in the main method, if I say final integer k, and I can assign it k is equal to 10 in the next line, but without assigning it is going to give you error. If you save this program, you can assign it only once. If you say 10, you can do it here, or you can do like k is equal to 10. But if you assign later, like if you say k is equal to 15, then it's going to create a problem. So it says, final variable, local variable may already have been assigned. You cannot do the assignment again. Okay, so this is with respect to the variables. And if you wanted to look at like let's say go ahead and change this method as a final method. So let me make it as final. That means bank is implementing this and it doesn't want this get monthly payment should be overridden. So what will happen here is all the implementations has gone wrong now. See, only Citibank is using this method and others are not using this method. They are trying to override this method. So they are saying, final method overrides, cannot override the final method from bank, because the bank is defining this method and it wants to be the final implementation. No one should be rewriting this method or providing their own implementation. So that can be achieved by making the methods as final. So if you don't want anyone to override your method, the subclasses to override your method, we can make that as final. The next thing is making a final class. So if you make this bank class as final, then it's going to combine all the three classes, BOA, Chase and City, because BOA is extending bank, which is not allowed because this class is final. So the type BOA cannot subclass the final class bank. So it's not allowed. When you when the class is final, you cannot extend from it. You cannot inherit that class.